Why would Illyrio have given Dany dragon eggs at her wedding if he was actually supporting Aegon or young Griff the entire time? For me, this has always been one of the most confusing points of the books, and honestly has bordered on feeling like a plot hole at times. I have even seen it used as a point to argue that George didn't have the young Griff plot in mind when he wrote the first book. Because when you first examine the plan, it really doesn't make any sense for Varys or Illyrio to want to give Daenerys these 3 dragon eggs with what their plan seems to be at the beginning. Well, I'm happy to announce that I am no longer confused by this plan. I think I know exactly what Illyrio was doing with those dragon eggs, and it was not only a good plan and well thought out, it was downright devious, and would have absolutely worked if not for the miracle of Dany's eggs hatching. And the drama that plan was intended to cause is very likely to pop up in the Winds of Winter. So to discuss this, the first thing we need to know is what was Illyrio and Varys' plan from the beginning, because they have young Griff being trained by Jon Connington and waiting, and that's who they actually want to be king. Meanwhile, Illyrio's hosting Viserys and Daenerys, and he ends up marrying Dany off to Khal Drogo, and as we said, he gives her these 3 dragon eggs, which are incredibly expensive, very valuable, very rare. It is shocking to think that anyone would part with these things unless they had a very good reason. So Varys and Illyrio's plan at this point seems to be having Dany and Viserys, along with Khal Drogo and the Dothraki, play the bad guys in their plan. Those 2 will come in with the Dothraki, try to take the Iron Throne. They sweep over the 7 kingdoms, throw everything into chaos, cause all sorts of damage, the small folk will probably hate them, and then in swoops Aegon, who claims to be the rightful heir, in line ahead of all of them, and he takes over the throne. Everybody loves him. It is the ultimate setup for Aegon to just have a nice little walk into power, where everyone should turn to him as someone who can take them out of this chaos. Now, it's not until Daenerys hatches her eggs and becomes a powerful piece in her own right that they start to work her into these plans in a serious way, and then they try to send Aegon to her to get a marriage alliance, which obviously wasn't the original plan for Daenerys, because if it was, Illyrio could have just married her to Aegon while she was staying there and he was brokering her marriage alliance. So clearly the plan has changed. Clearly Daenerys was supposed to be the bad guy along with Viserys in the beginning, and clearly they did not expect those dragon eggs to hatch. But the glaring question remains of why give Dany the eggs? Even if they were simply just very, very expensive and very valuable, why not give those to Aegon as a symbol of legitimacy, or as just, some fancy gemstones which he could sell for gold if he needed the gold? Why give these famously Targaryen, valuable prized treasures to the one who you are trying to paint as the bad guy? Well, it all finally clicked as to what Illyrio is actually trying to do here when I had watched a couple different videos from a couple different A Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers who I'd like to shout out. The first is the Interesting Nerd Club, who put out their Red Door theory, which is an absolute classic and will be one of the videos at the end card of this video if you want to check it out after this. And the other is a series that was recently just finished by Random Internet Guy, and part 1 of that series will be the other end card at the end of this video. The series is called A Game for Two Players, and it discusses Varys and Illyrio's schemes, and it was in part 3 that he dropped an absolute bomb that I had not heard before that suddenly made all of this click together in my head. So the first thing to understand here is one of the ideas proposed in the Red Door theory is that Varys and Illyrio are essentially not only planning to try paint a Blackfyre as a Targaryen, but they are trying to paint the real Daenerys Targaryen as a Blackfyre, as part of an informational warfare scheme. In addition to having her show up with the Dothraki and try and invade, they were going to paint her as illegitimate and as a Blackfyre trying to invade. At the same time, they were painting their potential Blackfyre in young Griff as a true Targaryen. Now, we already see inconsistencies in Daenerys' childhood with her memory of a house with a red door and a lemon tree in Braavos, which doesn't seem to track with the geography of Braavos and her memories. They don't seem to line up, so something is probably wrong there, and little things like this could be played upon to make Daenerys herself, or at the very least make others in Westeros, doubt her childhood story, and therefore doubt that she is indeed who she says she is. Now, what I thought was so interesting that the Interesting Nerd Club pointed out was that if Varys and Illyrio were scheming this out in advance, they could have taken even further steps to paint Daenerys as a Blackfyre, or at the very least, cast doubt on her own memories of her childhood. Another one of her key memories is how, when they were begging in the streets of the free cities, her brother had to sell their mother's crown just to feed them. So one of the very devious suggestions was perhaps the buyer of that crown, either directly or via another purchase later on, it ends up in the hands of these two very rich guys who have an interest in Westeros and old Targaryen artifacts, Varys and Illyrio. They could have ended up in possession of the crown that Dany claims to remember having being sold in the free cities. So then all it would take, if you are Lord Varys, is to let Daenerys tell her story in front of many of the High Lords of Westeros, and then simply go into the treasury of the Red Keep, produce the crown, and say, "I'm sorry, Daenerys, I don't know what crown you were talking about. The Targaryen crown has been here the entire time." So in the timeline where their original plan somewhat goes ahead, Daenerys, potentially with her Dothraki invaders and her brother, are showing up in Westeros, and everyone they try to tell their story to about how they are the legitimate Targaryens, Varys and Illyrio, who are potentially already publicly supporting young Griff, who may have already come out in all the chaos of this, maybe he invades at roughly the same time or just shortly after them, right? They can be supporting him, and in the ear of all the High Lords, and come out and say, no, 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 no. Here's why they are lying, we have the proof right here. And they have set this situation up to essentially show that Daenerys isn't who she claims to be, and therefore is probably a Blackfyre. So, okay, they would like to paint Daenerys and Viserys as Blackfyres, they would like to paint young Griff or Aegon as a legitimate Targaryen, and having a bunch of things about Daenerys' backstory make absolutely no sense, or that they can prove to be false, will definitely help in that. But it would be very helpful if they had some way to actually just genuinely straight up tie these two to being Blackfyres, because currently there's no, genuine proof of that. It's just a bunch of stuff that doesn't make sense that they can go, look, probably a Blackfyre. But that's not good enough. They need genuine, solid proof that can't be denied that Daenerys is a Blackfyre. So what does Illyrio do? This is where we bring in what Random Internet Guy was talking about in Part 3 of A Game for Two Players, where he makes a very clear case that the Blackfyres throughout history have been trying to acquire Targaryen symbols of legitimacy. One of those main symbols, of course, being dragon eggs, and eventually the dragons that would hatch from them. Now, the thing that he brought up that was so interesting that I hadn't heard about before was that in the Cushing Library drafts uncovered by G-Steph, one of the things that was just offhandedly mentioned was a clutch of Blackfyre dragon eggs. Now, this could potentially still be a thing that exists in the universe that George just hasn't really mentioned in the main series, which, the way he offhandedly mentioned them, it seems to read as though there's just a clutch of known-to-be Blackfyre dragon eggs that exist, right? Now, that itself is very interesting, and we're about to talk about it, but the other thing that Random Internet Guy brings up is past Blackfyre attempts to steal dragon eggs, which Quickfinger is the name of a thief who was caught trying to steal some dragon eggs for the Blackfyres, and then Alyssa Farman eventually did steal some dragon eggs from the Targaryens. It was a whole big deal. She sold them to the Sea Lord of Braavos. Kind of funny, the Targaryens rolled up to the Sea Lord of Braavos and were just like, hey, we know you have our stolen property. We know it's here. Where is it? And he's just like, well, I don't have it, but you know what I am going to do is I'm going to just reduce your debt to the Iron Bank by an amount that I agreed upon. Now get out of here. Just being like, no, look, I have your stolen property. You can't have it back, but I will buy it from you at a price that I decide from the debt that you already owe me. And that is just a total banker move by the Sea Lord of Braavos. But okay, so taking all of those things together then, the Blackfyre eggs that are supposedly mentioned in the draft version may or may not exist in the actual story itself. They haven't been mentioned yet, so we don't know. But what we can say for sure is that there is either a clutch of dragon eggs that are publicly existing and very well known to be Blackfyre dragon eggs, or there is a clutch of dragon eggs which is publicly existing and is known to have been stolen from the Targaryens and then sold to the Sea Lord of Braavos. So what you could do then, if you are Illyrio, is you could draw up a purchase agreement from the Sea Lord of Braavos, selling those eggs on record to Blackfyre buyers or Blackfyre supporters, and therefore creating a public record not only to having those eggs be stolen from the legitimate Targaryens, but then purchased on record by the Blackfyres. So in either case, you have a clutch of dragon eggs, which are essentially publicly known to be proof that whoever is carrying them around is a Blackfyre. And that's why Illyrio gave them to Daenerys. They were 3 big, shiny, stolen gems that would guarantee everyone who saw her in Westeros would know she was a Blackfyre. Alternatively, if Daenerys doesn't survive in the Dothraki Sea, which I think is a thing Illyrio mentions, he was surprised that she even made it, well then her brother is clearly just going to take those known to be Blackfyre eggs himself. Maybe he carries them with him when he comes to Westeros, maybe he tries to sell them, maybe he just carries them around for the rest of his life, forever tarnishing his legitimacy. I mean, when you think about it for a second, that is such a good plan by Illyrio. That is genius. That is all so well thought out to pretty much guarantee everyone's going to think that this girl is a Blackfyre the second she shows up destroying the countryside and carrying those eggs around. It's like, oh yeah, obviously this girl is a Blackfyre. Her birth is already suspect. Her childhood is already suspect. She can't really answer any questions that would make any sense. And also, she's carrying around these stolen from the Targaryens Blackfyre dragon eggs. So when you take this in combination with Zach from the Interesting Nerd Club's idea of just hardcore gaslighting of Daenerys and using potentially their wealth to purchase items like her crown to enable them to further disprove her own life story, well, slipping 3 Blackfyre dragon eggs to her as a wedding gift is a very sneaky way to do just that. And when you bring up what Random Internet Guy was talking about, how the Blackfyres have been trying to get these dragon eggs as a symbol of legitimacy, well, if you take the fact that everyone now knows that, and they kind of got caught stealing them, how can you use that to your advantage? Well, you could turn around and use those now known to be stolen eggs to paint someone else as the Blackfyre that you don't want to be recognized as. I could honestly see this being the reason there are so many hints that Dany's 3 dragon eggs could be the 3 that were stolen by Alyssa Farman, because the idea of them being stolen eggs, stolen from the real Targaryens, would just be very helpful for Illyrio to be planting them on someone who he didn't want to be looked at as legitimate. And obviously, with them planning ahead, this sets up a situation where they could have had Varys produce a receipt for the sale of those eggs to Blackfyres, and maybe just give it to the king as a bit of information years ago. Knowing that they're planning to use those eggs to paint Daenerys as a Blackfyre, what they could then do is just have her show up in Westeros, and the plan would be she'd still be carrying the unhatched eggs, and then all of a sudden Varys turns to whoever's king at the time and says, oh look, we got this receipt years ago. The Blackfyres bought those eggs. That's the ultimate proof. Right there. There it all is. And he's got a paper trail that proves, yeah, Daenerys is a Blackfyre. It makes way more sense to me than any of the other reasons. Obviously, he didn't think that they would hatch. That's always been baked into him giving them to Dany, but at the same time, that alone was never a good enough reason for him to just be willing to just off 3 dragon eggs with no gain to himself. There had to be some sort of gain for Illyrio to part with these very valuable objects. And the gain is to make Viserys and Daenerys look illegitimate. Now, if you want just a little bit more evidence that this is exactly the type of thing that would be up the alley of Illyrio and Varys, just take a look at what Illyrio says to Tyrion was their main business when they first got started. Essentially, they would buy and sell stolen property, or rather, they would get stolen property and then Illyrio would get it back to the people who it was stolen from for a small fee. So by Illyrio's own admission, whether true or not, it is a thing that they have already done to basically be profiting off of stolen goods in one way or another, and in this case, it seems they are doing the same thing, and their plans are profiting off of these stolen dragon eggs. So if you're George, I could see it going this way. You have written these books, you are realizing, okay, it is definitely feeling like a little bit of an issue that Illyrio would give Dany these eggs. There needs to be some sort of reason that ties into their original plan that would make sense for him to give these eggs. And obviously painting her as a Blackfyre seems to be what he has gone with. And so in the drafts, he has just mentioned there's a clutch of Blackfyre eggs. But at some point, he probably decided, you know, that's a little too obvious because the second people hear that the Blackfyres had some dragon eggs, are going to wonder where are those eggs, and then they'll realize, oh, Illyrio gave them to Dany, and then they might put together, oh, he gave her known Blackfyre dragon eggs, and then everyone starts to put together that, oh, wait a minute, he was painting her as a Blackfyre. So George hides it behind one more layer of little shenanigans, by having the eggs then introduced that were stolen by Alyssa Farman and sold to the Sea Lord of Braavos. So rather than having directly known to be Blackfyre eggs, he can have a big reveal of a piece of paperwork or a sales document that proves that the eggs didn't come from a shy, as Illyrio had said they did, but that they were bought by the Blackfyres and now are in the possession of Daenerys, therefore, ta-da, she's a Blackfyre. The entire painting of Daenerys as a Blackfyre and all of the informational warfare that could potentially go on when she comes to Westeros is definitely a topic I might have to dive deeper into in a future video, but I really did feel like this mystery about the eggs and why she would have been given them by Illyrio deserved its own discussion, because it had bothered me basically since I read the reveal of Aegon. Well then, bro, why did you give Dany those dragon eggs? That doesn't make any sense. Well, when they were a big shiny symbol that says, hey, look, here's a Blackfyre, now it kinda makes sense. Let me know what you think of this answer down in the comments, and if you are interested in more information about the schemes of Varys and Illyrio, check out the videos in the end card here, A Game for Two Players by Random Internet Guy, and The Red Door Theory by The Interesting Nerd Club. They were the two pieces of the puzzle that put this mystery together for me in a satisfying way, so let me know what you think. Can you add any information to it? Do you have anything else we need to take a look at? Let me know in the comments, like and subscribe before you go, and I'll see you all with something else very soon.